These days, almost everything is known about Yuri Gagarin's flight into space. But, strangely enough, not much is known about Gagarin himself as a person. And in his biography, there are facts that have become myths. And on the contrary, myths that have become facts. Much remains practically unknown to the general public. There are also things that are still classified and give rise to all sorts of theories and rumors. Let's discuss all of this. Let's talk about what the secret of this man, Yuri Gagarin, really is. As is traditional for our channel, we'll look at it from those angles that usually remain in the shadows. By the end of this episode, your perspective on this historical figure will likely change. To better understand how this person's character was formed, let's start from the beginning. Yuri Gagarin, born on March 9, 1934, spent his early childhood in Klushino village, Smolensk region. His parents, Alexei Ivanovich and Anna Timofeevna, were of peasant origin. The family had other children, the eldest, Valentina and Zoya, and the youngest, Boris. One day, journalists asked the cosmonaut if his family was related to the Gagarin princes. He had to start his speech at the press conference not by talking about the flight, but by distancing himself from certain Gagarin princes who were in exile and claimed to be related to his family. Truly, wherever the horse goes with its hoof, the crayfish follows with its claw, Yuri later recalled. Indeed, Yuri Gagarin had no blue-blooded relatives. By all accounts, his childhood would have been completely ordinary if not for the war. It was during his childhood, when his character and human qualities were being formed, that the German occupation took place. In the first winter, the occupiers took oats and barley from the locals for their horses, sparing the rye and wheat. The next year, they began taking and slaughtering the livestock too. The villagers ate the meat of horses killed by shells. Yura and Borya, the younger ones, picked nettles along ditches to make cabbage soup. They also ate sorrel and burdock roots to supplement their diet. In the Gagarin's house, the Germans set up a workshop for repairing communication equipment and charging batteries. In his autobiography, Yuri says that the village boys imitated the adults and tried to harm the Germans. They scattered sharp nails and broken bottles on the road, which punctured the tires of German vehicles. Klushino was very close to the front. During bombings, the Gagarins hid in a dugout, counting the bomb blasts and artillery salvos. As the area was being liberated, in January of '43, the Germans began taking the youth of Klushino for forced labor. The Gagarins had their 17-year-old Valentin and 15-year-old Zoya taken away. After the liberation, Alexei Ivanovich was finally drafted into the army and sent to help rebuild Gzhatsk. For 2 years, Yura became the eldest man in the family. Some biographers associate this fact with the leadership qualities he developed early on. In March, the boy returned to school. Due to the war, he was older than his classmates and studied with children 2 years his junior. His younger siblings, Valentin and Zoya, who ended up in a German labor camp, only returned home after the war ended. After the war, the Smolensk region was littered with mines and shell fragments. All the boys knew about weapons firsthand. They traded them, cleaned, and oiled them. These were Schmeissers, PPS Jits, Nagants, Parabellums, Walthers, and Generals Brownings. According to the recollections of his classmate Lev Tolkolin, Gagarin already knew how to load, shoot, and repair weapons as a child. The kids concealed components and ammo in the veggie patch. A vivid childhood memory for Yura was an episode before the occupation when he saw airplanes for the first time. Yak and Lag planes with red-starred wings engaged in an air battle. One was shot down, the pilot bailing out near the ground. His comrade landed right after to help. The boys immediately ran over there. Each of us wanted to fly, to be as brave and handsome as they were, recalled Gagarin. Everyone hoped that the pilots would spend the night at their house, but they spent the night by the plane and flew away in the morning. It took a long time to reach the dream of aviation. It didn't come true right away. First, in 1949, Gagarin entered the Lyubertsy Vocational School to become a molder caster. In 1951, he entered the Saratov Industrial Technical School in the same foundry department, where he joined the Volunteer Society for Cooperation with the Army, Aviation, and Fleet Flying Club. There, Yuri made his first solo flight on a yak. Finally, in 1955, Gagarin was drafted into the Army and sent to the Aviation School in Orenburg. By the way, he was almost expelled from it. He showed excellent results in almost everything, except for one thing. He just couldn't manage to land the plane properly. And only the head of the school, Major General Vasily Makarov, realized that the problem was Yuri's short height, 165 centimeters. This made it hard for him to feel the ground. He saw the runway from a different angle. Gagarin started putting a cushion on his seat, and the problem was solved. Moreover, for a cosmonaut, being short was not a problem, but a necessity. And later, it helped Gagarin 100%, becoming his advantage. And after some time, seeing that world-famous smile, all the boys in the Soviet Union started dreaming of becoming cosmonauts. Yuri Gagarin met his future wife at a dance during his time at the aviation school. Valentina Ivanovna Goryacheva was born in Orenburg on December 15, 1935, and studied at the local medical school. As Gagarin later recalled, he immediately liked his future wife. Shy, in a blue dress, with a sprinkling of freckles on her nose. However, the couple only got married in 1957 after both of them had finished their studies. Then Gagarin was sent to serve in the city of Zapolyarny, and soon his young wife joined him there. Gagarin discovered the selection of cosmonauts for training for the inaugural Vostok 1 spacecraft flight. And on December 9, 1959, he wrote a report requesting to be included in the group of candidates. A week later, he was called to Moscow for a comprehensive medical examination. Psychologists noted the following character traits of Yuri Gagarin. He enjoys spectacles with active action, where heroism, the will to win, and the spirit of competition prevail. In sports games, he takes the role of initiator, leader, and team captain. As a rule, his will to win, endurance, determination, sense of teamwork, and his favorite word, work, play a role here. He is always confident in himself and his abilities. His confidence is always steady. It is very difficult, essentially impossible, to throw him off balance. His mood is usually a bit elevated, probably because his head is full of humor and laughter. At the same time, he is sober-minded and possesses boundless self-control. He handles training easily and works effectively. He is very well-rounded, sincere, pure in soul and body, polite, tactful, and meticulous to the point of punctuality. He likes to repeat what he was taught. He is modest and gets embarrassed when he goes too far with his jokes. His intellectual development is high, and he has an excellent memory. He stands out among his peers for his broad range of active attention, quick wit, and fast reactions. He is diligent, prepares thoroughly for classes and training, confidently manipulates formulas of celestial mechanics and higher mathematics, and is not shy about defending the point of view he believes is correct. It seems that he knows more about life than some of his friends. His relationship with his wife is tender and friendly. During the research, the ability to relax even in the shortest breaks was revealed. Yuri Gagarin could fall asleep quickly, and then wake up at a set time without using an alarm clock. The eldest daughter of the first cosmonaut later spoke about this in numerous interviews. According to Elena Gagarina, her father could come home tired after work, tell his family he would sleep for 40 minutes, and sleep exactly 40 minutes, after which he would get up right on time. Yuri Gagarin was always strict about following the rules because it was important to him to reach the flights without any reprimands. However, Gagarin also maintained strict discipline at home, which is why his daily routine included some rather unusual items for such a famous person. Gagarin helped his wife, who gave birth to their 2 daughters, with almost everything. Valentina Ivanovna Gagarina could easily leave the children with her husband, who managed to find time in his busy schedule to study with them or simply play. When he got home, he'd jokingly report to his wife with a mock salute. The kids are clean, fed, and asleep. The cosmonaut was not above doing housework. He could clean up and even cook lunch. In Yuri Alexeyevich's daily schedule, there were often notes like, "Today, I need to help Valya beat the carpets." Later, Gagarin taught his daughters to follow a strict daily routine as well. Every morning after breakfast, the whole family would plan out the upcoming day together, point by point. The scariest threats for the girls were their mother's words that she would report any misbehavior to their father. However, Gagarin was hardly a tyrant, as he was always moderate in all aspects. His daughters loved him very much and would run to him as soon as he appeared at the door. Papa Yura affectionately called them clingy. Interestingly, Gagarin was regularly asked, "Who would you like to be when you grow old?" And he would jokingly reply that he wanted to be the manager of a space amusement park and give children rides on the carousels. However, Yuri Gagarin was not perfect, but he had to be. After all, he was required to fully embody the image of the ideal Soviet person. Over time, the entire Soviet Union was supposed to dissolve in him, an ideal state in an imperfect world. He had to share space in a cramped booth, where even a person of average build would have trouble squeezing in, with another 200 million compatriots. That's exactly what he said. "This is not my personal glory. Could I have reached space as a lone individual? Thousands of Soviet people worked on building the rocket and the spacecraft that I was assigned to fly. This flight is the triumph of collective thought and labor of thousands of Soviet workers, engineers, and scientists, the glory of our people." Of course, Gagarin simply had to be the perfect family man. Therefore, when in November 1961, journalists asked, "Where from?" he got a significant scar above his left eyebrow, and the cosmonaut, smiling shyly, said he got it while on vacation in Crimea, playing with his daughter. Biographers refer to this episode as the Foros incident. Some consider it a bad joke, while others think it was an attempt to escape from his wife by jumping off the balcony of a room where there was another girl who had rejected his advances. One way or another, Gagarin remembered this for a long time, and it was hard not to remember. Every day when he looked in the mirror, he saw reminders of how one reckless act nearly cost him his life. After that incident, Gagarin wrote a letter to the party asking them to review his behavior at the resort. In it, he admitted to an incident of alcohol abuse and a careless attitude toward women. There were other incidents as well. Once, Yuri ran a red light in his gifted Volga. The accident happened because of Gagarin's fault. However, when the police officer arrived at the scene and recognized the Soviet star, he took Yuri away and tried to shift the blame onto the pensioner. The Pobyeda's owner, which the Volga crashed into, deserves credit, according to Gagarin. He returned to the scene of the incident and, seeing that they were trying to blame the pensioner for the accident, restored justice. Gagarin was different from his colleagues in the first group of cosmonauts. All of them, sooner or later, after reaching a certain career peak or success in their field, would stop. Gagarin never stopped even once, and this speaks to the uniqueness of his personality. At the moment when Gagarin reached the ceiling, he would shift either horizontally or vertically and move on in a completely new direction. Gagarin had an unwavering ability to keep learning and changing. And even after the flight on April 12, 1961, which could have been the highest point of his life and career, he kept moving forward. He earned an engineering degree, developed diplomatic and political skills, and prepared for a flight to the moon. Many are sure that at some point, the cosmonaut would have become someone else, if not for his tragic death. One can imagine for a long time who he might have become in that parallel reality where he survived. Even now, if Gagarin were alive, at 89 years old, he could be doing anything. It's hard to imagine a person with such a character retiring and just sorting through his medals. Shortly before his death, 34-year-old Gagarin was full of plans. In February of '68, he graduated from the Zhukovsky Air Force Engineering Academy, which was supposed to bring him a new position and the rank of head of the Cosmonaut Training Center and General. And that's not to mention that his name was on the crew list for the moon. At the same time, Gagarin decided to become a full-fledged pilot again, because after April 12, '61, he never once flew a plane on his own. The instructors for Gagarin's flights were meticulously selected, and the management was well aware of the risks involved. And suddenly, Gagarin dies in a plane crash during a training flight on a MiG-15 with flight instructor Vladimir Seryogin. Despite the enormous public outcry caused by Gagarin's death, there is still no official version. There are various alternative theories: that the MiG-15 was flipped over by the powerful jet wash of a Su-15 fighter flying very close by, or that the MiG-15 was a training aircraft for practicing ejection, and therefore, when they found themselves in a difficult situation, Seryogin simply couldn't help Gagarin because there was no control stick. These theories are neither refuted nor confirmed. They only become more surrounded by rumors and gossip. And everything related to the investigation of Gagarin's death is strictly classified. 29 volumes of collected materials and sealed barrels with fragments of the plane are hidden in the Ministry of Defense. And in 2023, the Russian State Archive of Scientific and Technical Documentation published photographs from the site of Yuri Gagarin's death for the first time. But only 3 photographs were published. Let's hope that someday the veil of secrecy will fall, because after all, it was lifted 25 years after the flight. That's exactly how long the Soviet Union kept it secret that Gagarin landed by parachute, and not in the spacecraft as everyone believed. The thing is, if the first spaceflight had been approached from a bureaucratic point of view, it wouldn't have been counted as a spaceflight. According to the requirements of the International Aviation Federation, the status of a spaceflight was only given to a flight in which a person launched from Earth, traveled to space, and landed in the same aircraft. That's why the authorities of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics hid the fact for more than 20 years that Yuri Gagarin left the spacecraft and descended using a parachute. Revealing this secret could have had the most disastrous consequences for anyone who turned out to be too talkative. So, 2 years after Gagarin's triumph, one of the pilots, Valery Golovin, let it slip to a random person in a cafe that Yuri Gagarin landed not in the spacecraft, but by parachute. A month later, Golovin was suspended from work, and a few weeks later, the test pilot died after falling from the balcony of the high-rise building where he lived. Another thing wasn't discovered immediately. Famous footage shows Yuri Gagarin communicating in the spacecraft cabin and chief designer Sergei Korolyov at the command post. This is a reenactment made at a later time. At the moment of the actual launch, they simply didn't have time for that. Later, they decided to recreate the missing footage by asking Gagarin and Korolyov to repeat the same words they had said on April 12, 1961. Often, this fact becomes the basis for crazy theories that Gagarin never actually flew into space at all. These myths appeared right after the flight, just like many others. Even before the moon landing conspiracy theory, in the West, stories were published about secret Soviet cosmonauts who supposedly died before Yuri Gagarin's flight. The list of last names was quite long, and some of them belonged to test subjects from the Institute of Aviation and Space Medicine, since their level of secrecy was somewhat lower than that of the cosmonauts. That's why articles about the test subjects appeared in several Soviet media outlets, and in the West, they were remembered when stories about secret cosmonauts were needed. The test subjects themselves, even years later, could hear on Voice of America about their own tragic deaths. Nevertheless, the level of secrecy in some areas has not changed since the Soviet Union. And this automatically provokes more complex conspiracy theories, for example, that Gagarin was deliberately eliminated. His brother Valentin believes that the catastrophe was planned by malicious people precisely because too much glory fell to one person. There were also alarming testimonies. As Gagarin's personal driver, Fedor Demchuk, recounted, the cosmonaut's car had the fuel pump pipeline burst 3 times. The last such incident happened in February 1968, a month before his death, when Gagarin himself was driving the car. The car caught fire, and the first cosmonaut survived only by a miracle. Some biographers believe that Gagarin's death was not accidental, because at some point, his fortunate symbiosis with the state ended, and he began to cause irritation among some members of the then elite. After all, Yuri Gagarin was by nature a good communicator, and after his flight, he gained significant international influence. Both of these qualities were very useful for the Soviet Union, which was expanding its contacts with the West. Even then, this was all overseen by special services. At that time, they were creating beta versions of banks and all sorts of foreign trade structures, like the Chamber of Commerce. Here, for example, is the famous joint photograph of Gagarin and the head of Soviet intelligence and counterintelligence, Yevgeny Pitovranov. The extent of Yuri Gagarin's connection with special services is unknown due to lack of available information. But, undoubtedly, there is an aspect of his representative activities in the second half of the 60s related to contracts between the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the West that was definitely of interest to the special services. In the Soviet Union, the transition of power from the party to the special services began almost 50 years ago. We talked about this in detail in the episode The Turbulent 90s. And perhaps this was the reason for Gagarin's disappearance. He might have known too much. He might have been seen as an obstacle. There is no evidence to support this assumption. But there is one absolutely objective thing. There is still a strict taboo on everything related to Gagarin's death. Everything is hidden and forbidden. And here, it is quite reasonable to assume that something more significant happened than just a plane crash caused by bad weather. It's interesting that among the documents still closed to the public, there is also Gagarin's personal diary. Excerpts from it were published by his widow, Valentina Ivanovna, and they are extremely interesting. Gagarin kept a diary at least from 61 until March 68, and he let some people read it. The document was not entirely private. It's also known that he kept a diary during his youth in Saratov. Gagarin saw himself as a political figure. He consciously led an open lifestyle. When reporters from the glossy magazines of that time offered to do a photo shoot in his apartment, he agreed. Gagarin understood that he was a public face of the authorities, who had given him this status, this belonging to a special caste, these opportunities, and this apartment. He had to fulfill the terms of the social contract. Valentina Ivanovna apparently wasn't entirely comfortable with all this openness. Valentina Gagarina preferred to keep the windows curtained. She tried to stay close to Yuri, but because of the numerous events, she wasn't always able to do so. Once, opening up to the nurses, she told them about their marriage, about that wonderful time when Yuri was studying at the academy and they lived in a dormitory. She valued that life more than her current one and lamented her fate, saying he no longer belonged to her. Valentina Ivanovna Gagarina passed away not so long ago, in the year 20, at the age of 84. She lived a dignified life. She didn't go to any talk shows, didn't give interviews, and didn't run for office. When Gagarin died, his wife was not even 33 years old, but she never remarried. May her memory be blessed. By the way, what is known about the famous quote that says, "When Gagarin flew into space, he didn't see God"? That's supposedly how Gagarin answered Nikita Khrushchev. But there is no document that confirms that this popular phrase actually belongs to Gagarin. Even at the Kremlin reception for Gagarin's flight, alongside marshals and engineers like Sergei Korolyov, there were also representatives of the clergy. Gagarin communicated with them without sarcasm, realizing the church was part of the Soviet state elite. Even if unofficially, but still. Khrushchev, no matter how much people portrayed him as a fool, was actually a much more subtle person. Perhaps he was the one who made the joke, and the phrase was passed on to Gagarin, causing the story to stick to him. Here's another fact. In the mid-1960s, Yuri Gagarin gave a speech at another plenary session of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union Central Committee that stunned everyone present. In his naivety, Gagarin didn't even immediately understand why his words caused such a reaction. Then, to avoid a scandal, they even announced a break in the meeting. After the trip to the Trinity Sergius Lavra, which the cosmonaut made with friends on his own initiative, the first cosmonaut was supposed to speak at the next plenum of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union Central Committee on the issues of youth education. In his speech, Gagarin condemned the destruction of the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. In my opinion, we are still not doing enough to instill respect for our heroic past, often not thinking about preserving monuments. The Triumphal Arch in Moscow was dismantled and never restored. The Cathedral of Christ the Savior, built in 1812 with money collected from all over the country in honor of the victory over Napoleon, was destroyed. And also, Gagarin did not sign the statement condemning religion by Soviet cosmonauts to the young atheist Leninists of the land of the Soviets, which was published in the magazine Science and Religion. In 1966, Gagarin, as a true people's hero, gave a voice to many people. Everyone who saw Gagarin even for 5 seconds, or got his autograph on a postcard, considered it their duty to publish their memories about it. People often make things up or lie to themselves, which is normal and a sign of a living cult that emerges from the grassroots, not imposed from above. People are not just interested in Gagarin, they love him. In Russia, on fences, you can read desperate messages like, "Yura, forgive us, we messed everything up," or hopeful ones like, "Yura, we'll fix everything." And no one needs to be told who this Yura is, everyone understands. What is the secret behind such enduring popularity? At first, the cult of Gagarin was a form of state cult. He was the embodiment of a machine that endlessly carries out expansion. And after his death, especially since the 1990s, Gagarin became not just a national favorite, but a people's saint, canonized from the grassroots. Not so much just a successful employee of the space industry, but rather the embodiment of collective ideas about ideal national traits. There are several reasons for this. Gagarin is very likable in appearance, a wide smile, radiant eyes, a bit childlike and mischievous. But at the same time, his tone is very familiar, not official, and his voice is encouraging.
There's more shaking on a train than on a rocket. The rocket moves much more smoothly, much more calmly than a train, and you don't experience that rocking and shaking.
But perhaps the main reason for Gagarin's canonization is the sense of gratitude for the meaning that Gagarin and those who launched him gave to people. They often didn't understand why they lived differently from the rest of the world, why they were taking part in this strange social experiment. All the monstrous sacrifices of state terror, which cannot be justified, at least are not in vain, because there is a result. And what a result! The whole country worked for several decades to create someone like Gagarin, and they succeeded. He did not let them down. The faith in Gagarin comes from the people, not state-mandated. The love for him seems to only grow over time. It seems that if Gagarin's silhouette suddenly appeared on the Russian flag, or on the Russian coat of arms, even that wouldn't cause negative emotions among the majority of the population. Write in the comments what you think about this.
Dear friends, close and unfamiliar compatriots, people of all countries and continents, in a few minutes a mighty spacecraft will carry me into the distant expanses of the universe. What can I say to you in these last minutes before the launch? All my life seems to me now like one beautiful moment. Everything that I have lived through, everything that I have done before was lived and done for the sake of this moment. Can one dream of anything more?